Mazda has overcome challenges that would have ended most companies. It survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, rebuilt itself, and later developed an engine that many experts believed could never work. Yet in 2026, the company found itself facing one of the toughest periods in its modern history. Profits plunged. Owners of one of its best-selling SUVs were warned to stop driving their vehicles because of a major safety issue, and its electric vehicle strategy struggled so much that Mazda eventually turned to Chinese manufacturers for help with its next generation of EVs. So how did a company known for innovation end up in this position? The answer comes down to 5 major problems that all trace back to one defining characteristic: Mazda's fiercely independent identity. To understand Mazda's current struggles, you first have to understand what has always made the company different. Unlike most major Japanese automakers, Mazda doesn't have a massive financial safety net. Toyota sells more than 10 million vehicles worldwide every year, giving it enormous scale and the ability to absorb economic shocks that would cripple smaller competitors. Nissan benefits from its long-standing alliance with Renault and Mitsubishi, allowing it to share technology, platforms, and development costs. Honda has built a strong global business with decades of investment in hybrid systems, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing. Mazda, however, stands alone. The company sells roughly 1.2 million vehicles annually around the world, a respectable number, but tiny compared to Toyota. For years, that smaller size wasn't a weakness. In fact, it became one of Mazda's greatest strengths. Since Mazda couldn't compete by spending more money, it focused on building better cars through clever engineering. One of the best examples is the rotary engine. Nearly every other automaker abandoned the concept after deciding it wasn't practical. Mazda refused to give up. Instead, it spent years solving the engineering problems until it introduced the Cosmosport in 1967. That car represented more than just new technology. It proved Mazda was willing to take risks that others wouldn't. The company's philosophy was simple: if everyone else is taking the same path, find another way. That mindset continued for decades and helped Mazda carve out a unique place in the market. It never tried to become a true luxury brand, nor did it compete solely on price. Instead, it created what many people describe as affordable luxury. Cars like the Mazda 3 and CX-5 offered premium interiors, refined driving dynamics, and attention to detail that often made them feel far more expensive than they actually were. Soft touch materials replaced the hard plastics commonly found in rival vehicles. The steering was carefully tuned to give drivers genuine feedback instead of feeling numb or artificial. Even Mazda's famous "Zoom Zoom" slogan reflected a real engineering philosophy, rather than just clever marketing. As a result, Mazda built one of the most loyal customer bases in the automotive industry. Many owners didn't simply buy one Mazda. They came back for another, and then another. That kind of loyalty is incredibly valuable. However, being small and independent comes with risks. When the entire auto industry goes through massive change, companies with deep financial resources have far more room to adapt. Mazda doesn't enjoy that luxury, and in 2026, the challenges facing the industry became impossible to ignore. One of the biggest blows came from new import tariffs. The financial impact was severe. During the first half of Mazda's fiscal year 2026, covering April through September, the company reported an operating loss of 53.9 billion yen, more than $350 million. Looking at the entire fiscal year, ending in March 2026, global sales dropped to approximately 1.223 million vehicles, a decline of 6% compared to the previous year. The company's financial performance deteriorated even faster. Operating income fell by 72%. Net income declined by 69%. Those aren't small setbacks. They represent one of the sharpest profit declines in Mazda's recent history. The biggest reason was the new tariff environment. While every Japanese automaker faced higher import costs, Mazda was hit harder than most because of where it builds its vehicles. Unlike Toyota and Honda, which manufacture a large portion of their US lineup domestically, Mazda still relies heavily on overseas production. Popular SUVs like the CX-5, CX-70, and CX-90 are manufactured in Japan. Meanwhile, the CX-30 and the Mazda 3 sedan are produced in Mexico. When the US imposed tariffs of up to 27.5% on vehicles imported from Japan and 25% on vehicles built in Mexico, Mazda's costs increased dramatically. According to the company, US tariffs alone reduced profits by 97.1 billion yen during just the first half of the fiscal year. That's an enormous financial hit, equivalent to wiping out the earnings of an entire business division simply because of import taxes. Mazda had little choice but to respond. Instead of flooding dealerships with vehicles that had become far less profitable, the company reduced production. Wholesale shipments fell by 8% during the first half of the fiscal year as Mazda deliberately limited inventory. That strategy helped reduce losses, but it also showed up in sales results across the United States. During the first 4 months of 2026, Mazda's US sales declined by more than 15% compared with the previous year. April alone recorded a 17.3% drop. Some individual models performed even worse. The Mexico-built CX-30 experienced one of the sharpest declines, with sales falling by 56%. For a company that has built its reputation on smart engineering, loyal customers, and independent thinking, these numbers highlight just how difficult the current environment has become. Mazda's story has always been about overcoming impossible odds. The question now is whether that same spirit can help the company navigate one of the most challenging periods in its history. The picture gets even worse when you look at Mazda's individual models. Sales of the CX-70 dropped by 46%, while the larger CX-90 wasn't far behind, falling 40%. Even the Mazda 3 sedan, one of the company's more dependable performers, experienced a month where sales plunged nearly 59% compared to the previous year. In fact, only 2 vehicles in Mazda's entire US lineup are currently moving in the right direction: the CX-50 and the Mazda 3 hatchback. And that's no coincidence. The CX-50 is assembled in the United States at the Mazda Toyota manufacturing plant in Huntsville, Alabama. Because it's built domestically, it avoids most of the import tariffs that are hurting the rest of Mazda's lineup. As a result, CX-50 sales climbed nearly 20% year over year. But that doesn't necessarily mean customers suddenly prefer the CX-50 over every other Mazda. Instead, it highlights a much bigger issue. Ironically, the part of Mazda's business that has remained relatively protected is the one it shares with Toyota. Meanwhile, many of the vehicles produced in Mazda's own factories overseas are facing the full impact of higher import costs, making them far less competitive. Then things became even more complicated. Weak sales and shrinking profits are problems any automaker can eventually recover from. Tariffs change, markets improve, and demand can return. But just as Mazda was dealing with growing financial pressure, its newest flagship SUVs started developing a series of serious quality and safety concerns. Unfortunately, these weren't just any vehicles. They were the CX-70 and CX-90, the 2 SUVs Mazda was counting on to strengthen its position in one of the world's most competitive market segments. One of the biggest concerns involved a steering issue that quickly gained attention among owners and regulators. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, opened an investigation into reports of what many drivers described as sticky steering. Owners claimed the steering wheel could suddenly become unusually heavy or difficult to turn, in some cases while driving at highway speeds. That's far more serious than a cosmetic defect or an annoying interior rattle. A sudden change in steering response can directly affect a driver's ability to control the vehicle. Because of the potential safety risk, regulators advised owners of affected vehicles not to drive them until the required repairs had been completed. Another major issue involved the fuel system. In September 2025, Mazda recalled more than 104,000 CX-70 and CX-90 SUVs after discovering that ethanol in gasoline could react with material inside the fuel level sensor. The problem could cause the fuel gauge to display inaccurate readings, making it appear that plenty of fuel remained when the tank was actually close to empty. In some situations, drivers could unexpectedly run out of fuel, causing the engine to stall. Some vehicles even failed to restart afterward. Imagine entering a busy highway believing you still have fuel, only for the engine to lose power without warning. That's the type of situation no driver wants to face. And the recalls didn't stop there. In November 2024, Mazda issued another recall covering more than 80,000 CX-70 and CX-90 models because of a faulty dashboard control module. The defect could disable several important features simultaneously, including the windshield defroster, the seatbelt warning chime, and the 360-degree camera system immediately after startup. Around the same time, nearly 39,000 CX-90 SUVs were recalled because the automatic engine stop-start system could fail to restart the engine after shutting it off at traffic lights or during brief stops. Earlier in 2025, Mazda also recalled more than 171,000 vehicles over an airbag issue that could prevent proper deployment during a collision. When you put all of these recalls together, the scale becomes difficult to ignore. Within roughly 2 years, hundreds of thousands of Mazda vehicles required recalls, with the majority involving the CX-70 and CX-90. These weren't niche products. They were Mazda's flagship 3-row SUVs, the models designed to compete directly against popular rivals from Toyota, Honda, and Kia. For a company that has spent decades building its reputation around engineering excellence, reliability, and an enjoyable driving experience, repeated recalls carry consequences that go beyond repair costs. Customers may overlook one recall. They might even accept a second. But after several major recalls affecting the same vehicles in such a short period, confidence naturally begins to fade. That creates a challenge money alone can't easily fix. Now, before we get to what may be the biggest problem of all, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the automotive industry, consider subscribing to MotorZen and turning on notifications. We cover the biggest developments shaping car companies around the world, and there are plenty more stories like this on the way. Because despite everything we've covered so far, declining sales, rising tariffs, and repeated recalls, there's another chapter in Mazda's story that may have the biggest impact on its future. It's electric vehicle strategy. And this isn't a problem that's just beginning. It's one that already stumbled years ago. Back in 2019, Mazda introduced its first serious battery electric vehicle for the US market, the MX-30. At first glance, it seemed like a cautious but reasonable first step into the EV world. In reality, however, it struggled almost immediately. Its biggest weakness was range. The MX-30 could travel only about 100 miles on a full charge at a time when competing electric vehicles were already offering well over 250 miles. Mazda also chose to sell it only in California, dramatically limiting its potential customer base. To make matters more difficult, the starting price exceeded $35,000. That meant buyers were paying premium money for a compact electric crossover that delivered significantly less driving range than competitors like the Nissan Leaf. Instead of establishing Mazda as a serious player in the EV market, the MX-30 became an early reminder of just how difficult the transition to electric vehicles would be for a smaller, independent automaker. Mazda's first electric vehicle in the United States had a very short life. After the 2023 model year, the company quietly discontinued the MX-30, ending its US run after less than 2 years. Although the announcement was brief, it marked the failure of Mazda's first attempt to compete in the American EV market. The story didn't end there. In Europe, Mazda continued selling the MX-30R EV, a range extender version powered by a small rotary engine that generated electricity instead of driving the wheels. It was a creative way to reuse the technology that made Mazda famous, but innovation alone couldn't attract enough buyers. By early 2026, Mazda also discontinued the model in Europe, citing changing customer demand. So, where does Mazda go from here? Instead of developing its next generation of electric vehicles entirely on its own, Mazda has partnered with Chinese automaker Changan. Upcoming models like the EZ6 and EZ60 are being developed through this collaboration. There's nothing unusual about automakers sharing technology today. EV development is expensive, and partnerships help reduce costs. For Mazda, it's a practical decision. But it also represents a major shift for a company that built its reputation on doing things differently. The brand that once proved everyone wrong with the rotary engine is now relying on outside help to compete in the fastest growing part of the auto industry. The challenge is that the industry isn't waiting. While Mazda struggled with its first EV, competitors continued investing billions into electric vehicles, batteries, and software. Today, Mazda isn't just entering the EV race, it's trying to catch up while also dealing with financial pressure and product quality issues. Those financial problems are largely tied to Mazda's size. For years, being a smaller automaker gave Mazda the freedom to focus on engineering instead of volume. It created cars known for excellent handling, premium interiors, and strong customer loyalty. But that same independence has become a disadvantage during a period of massive industry change. Unlike Toyota, Honda, or Nissan, Mazda doesn't have the support of a huge global alliance or the financial strength of a much larger company. When US tariffs added nearly 97 billion yen in costs, Mazda couldn't absorb the impact as easily as its larger competitors. The losses directly affected profits, production, and future investment. Then came the recalls. The CX-70 and CX-90, two SUVs expected to drive Mazda's future growth, were hit by multiple safety issues, including steering problems, fuel system defects, electrical faults, and airbag recalls. These weren't small concerns. They affected hundreds of thousands of vehicles and damaged customer confidence. For a company known for engineering quality, repeated recalls can hurt its reputation far more than a temporary drop in sales. The same challenge applies to electric vehicles. When Mazda's first EV failed in both the US and Europe, the company didn't have the resources to simply start over with an entirely new platform. Instead, it turned to a strategic partnership to speed up development and reduce costs. Imagine Mazda's leadership today. They're trying to maintain the image of a premium, driver-focused brand while explaining lower profits, reduced production, major recalls, and an EV strategy that has already faced setbacks. None of these issues alone would threaten the company, but together they create one of the toughest periods in Mazda's history. Mazda has built its reputation by overcoming challenges and finding unconventional solutions. Whether that same independent spirit can help it navigate the electric era remains one of the biggest questions facing the company today. To Mazda's credit, the company hasn't responded to these challenges with panic. Instead, it has taken a measured and disciplined approach. Rather than flooding dealerships with vehicles that would generate little or no profit, Mazda deliberately reduced production to protect its margins. It's also placing greater focus on the US-built CX-50 and its hybrid version, currently the brightest spot in its lineup. Because it's built at the Mazda-Toyota manufacturing plant in Alabama, the CX-50 avoids most of the tariff costs affecting Mazda's imported vehicles. Its strong sales prove that when tariffs aren't standing in the way, Mazda can still build products that customers genuinely want. Mazda is also making better use of its US manufacturing partnership instead of relying entirely on overseas production. At the same time, the company has maintained its full-year outlook and continues to expect a return to profitability later in the fiscal year. That calm, methodical response reflects Mazda's identity. This is the same company that spent years perfecting the rotary engine after most of the industry had abandoned it. Patience and engineering have always been Mazda's greatest strengths, but even the best strategy has limits. Tariffs, repeated recalls, and a slow start in the EV market all arrived at nearly the same time. Individually, each challenge could have been managed. Together, they created enormous pressure on a company that doesn't have the financial resources or global scale of its biggest competitors. And that's the real story. Mazda's problems aren't isolated events. The tariffs, falling sales of imported models, recalls affecting the CX-70 and CX-90, the unsuccessful MX-30, and the decision to partner with China's Chang'an for future EVs all point to the same underlying issue. Mazda built its reputation by competing with engineering, not size. For decades, that strategy worked brilliantly. It allowed the company to create distinctive cars, build an incredibly loyal customer base, and earn the respect of driving enthusiasts around the world. But today's automotive industry rewards scale more than ever before. Large manufacturers can absorb trade disputes, spread recall costs across millions of vehicles, and invest billions in electric vehicle development without threatening their entire business. Mazda doesn't have that luxury. When several major challenges hit within a short period, a smaller independent company has far fewer resources to rely on. That doesn't mean Mazda is in danger of disappearing. The company remains profitable overall, continues to enjoy one of the most loyal customer bases in the industry, and the success of the CX-50 shows its engineers still know how to build outstanding vehicles. What's changing is the environment around it. The era when a small, independent automaker could rely almost entirely on great engineering to compete has become far more difficult. Today's industry demands massive investments, global production networks, and strategic partnerships, areas where larger competitors hold a significant advantage. That's why Mazda's current struggles aren't simply the result of one bad decision. They're the result of several major challenges colliding at exactly the same time. Rising tariffs, costly recalls, and a delayed transition to electric vehicles. Together, they've created one of the toughest periods in the company's modern history. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to MotorZen for more in-depth stories from the automotive world. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Mazda will recover over the next few years? Or is this the beginning of a much bigger challenge for smaller independent automakers navigating tariffs, recalls, and the shift to electric vehicles? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.